In this video, I'm going to walk through a demonstration of mining financial data through the AlphaVantage API using tools available to you on the Unix shell. We're going to first take a look at the AlphaVantage Web API. I'm going to point you in the direction of the documentation, which is going to be linked along with this video. Then we're going to build up running these tools on the command line on the Unix shell, including wget, awk, sed in a very basic example, head, and xargs. And we're going to use those tools to compile a list of stock symbols and that are listed on the New York Stock Exchange, and then run an API query for each one of those to collect the historical data from the AlphaVantage API. The code for this demonstration are all available at this GitHub link below. If you want to find out more, there's another link to a similar approach that is posted at this blog here that I recommend you go check out. Somewhat different, but similar approach using the Unix shell to query the same API. First up, we have the AlphaVantage API. This is a web API with a HTTP protocol, which means just that we have to format URL strings to the API web interface that are going to return data for one of four categories in the form of either a CSV file or a JSON formatted file. In this demonstration, we're going to work with CSV files. The four categories of data that AlphaVantage services are time series for stocks, fundamental data for companies that are listed on the exchange, physical and digital currency exchange data, so foreign exchange rates and cryptocurrency exchange rates, and technical indicators. There are lots of examples on this page that I encourage you to go check out, and you can start playing with this with your free API key, but the code that we're going to be running today requires the higher tier API key. So the free API lets you do 5 queries per minute. We're interested here in doing bulk downloads with lots of requests over a relatively short period of time. And for this work today, we're going to be working in the Unix shell. In this case, I'm working inside of an RStudio window. RStudio is my favorite interface for so many things data science. It's not just R. You can do all kinds of stuff, including running commands on the terminal here, which is going to be our interface to the Unix shell. Okay, so here's our code that we're going to be building up to run to query all of the stocks listed on the New York Stock Exchange to collect their 20-year history from the AlphaVantage web interface. So we're going to first read in our API keys, which I'm going to show you a demo file for how to structure that. I'm not going to post the API keys that I'm going to be using online. But I will show you how to set that up with your own. Then we're going to use wget to gather a list of the stocks listed on the New York Stock Exchange. This one's about 2 years old. Maybe we could find a more up-to-date listing, but for demo purposes, this is going to give us a list of about 3,000 stocks, and we're going to go querying those. All right, and then we're going to build out this pipeline. So there's a variety of commands that are used here. I'm going to walk through each of those one at a time to show you what their output is and why we're using each one, and talk for just a little bit about other things that we could do along the way. And then at the end of all of that, we'll have a folder called AV data. We'll just peek in that to make sure that we have our CSV files. And then later we'll go on and we'll do things like load these into a Hadoop file system for distributed computing and analysis down the road. To run this code, you're going to need to obtain your own API key from the AlphaVantage website and create a file, a regular text file with this one line in it. So we're going to define a variable called AV_key and set that equal to the value of whatever your API key is right here. Keep those keys to yourself, especially if you paid for it. Okay, for this demo, we're going to be working in the Unix shell, and this is the terminal window that I have up right now. This is going to let us type these commands, execute those, and give us some answers back. This is a fundamental way of interacting with Unix-based systems, which are the basis for virtually every remote computing and distributed computing platform out there. Okay, the first thing we're going to want to do to set up this script is to load our API key into the environment so that we don't have to keep typing that into our script every time. So I'm going to run source AV keys because I put that single line that I showed you before into a file called AV keys with my API key listed in it. Source AV keys. I'm going to run that, and it doesn't show me anything, but if everything has gone correctly, then that has loaded the API key into a variable called AV key that I can use down below in the API query. The next thing that we're going to do is to set up a directory for these data to be put into. So I'm going to say mkdir AV data. Right, so that's going to make the directory for our AlphaVantage data to go into. So we've got our keys set up. We have a folder to drop data into. Now I'm going to run a wget command. So wget is a command line tool that grabs data from the web. So you can actually pass it any URL you choose. But in this case, we're going to point wget at a data repository on Data Hub that has New York Stock Exchange listings and will give us a handy dandy CSV file right here. So we're going to run that. wget's going to go out to the internet, grab it, wait for a second while it's hopefully downloading. And there it is. So our output from wget gave us a bunch of things. It gave us some information about where it was looking. And then it says, here's the important bit, saving to nyse-listed.csv. So let's take a look at that data. Let's just, let's get a sample. Head nyse-listed.csv. And if we do that, then we get a sampling of what we've got here. So it's comma separated. It looks like it has two columns. The first row tells us that we've got the ACT symbol, and the second column is the company name. So here are our symbols, AAA, on down, and we're going to use that column to query the AlphaVantage web interface. What's our workflow going to look like? We want to strip out that first column, and then for each of those, we're going to format a API call. All right, so the first thing that's a little bit flunky about this setup, it's good and bad. This CSV file is formatted with a header row. So the very first thing that I want to do is actually get rid of that header because ACT symbol is not something I want to query to the AlphaVantage API. That's not a stock symbol. I want everything starting with the second row. There's a variety of ways to do this, but the one that I'm going to show you, if we do head NYSE listed again, we're going to pipe the output of head using the pipe symbol, which is the straight up and down line. We're going to pipe that into another program called sed. Sed is really useful for text manipulation. In this case, we're going to use a code that's just going to tell sed to delete the first row of our data. So we're going to say sed 1D, and let's run that as a check. All right, and it may not be really clear here. Let's see. So we did head sed 1D, and the output now starts with our first row being a stock symbol and the name of the company. So now, like I said before, I want to pull out just the first column from this this file, or the data that we're looking at. So there's a bunch of ways, again, that you could do this, but my favorite tool for parsing CSV files like this is awk. So awk is another text processor program that is really handy for parsing these data table like objects, because we can define the field delimiter with a flag -F, and then we're going to pass it quote, comma, quote, because that is our field delimiter, right? It's a CSV file. So comma is the thing that we want to split up these fields on. So now awk is aware. It's going to read across every single row, and it's going to find the commas, and it's going to separate those into two tokens, token 1 and token 2. And now we can do different stuff with that. So again, like if you were trying to clean up your data and you wanted to edit just one column in bulk across a whole bunch of files, you could use awk to find that column and then do some kind of text substitution in there. So in this case, we've got a pretty simple protocol. The way awk works is after you say awk and what your field delimiter is, then you write a simple bit of code here. It can get really complicated, but we're going to keep it simple here today. But then you write what you want awk to do. So in this case, I have no flow control that I want to do here. I don't want to have any trues and falses. I don't want to test for anything. Just for every single row, I want to do something. And so I'm going to do that thing inside of these curly braces here. And so in this case, I want to do print $1, because that's going to say print as an output from awk here, print just the first column, print token 1 for every row. And I'm going to run that so you can see it. All right, so now it's printed just the stock symbols. If I wanted to say print just the stock names, I would change this to print $2. And now it's printing just the names. So I've efficiently separated those two columns, and it can do one or the other. I could also do things like, I don't know, let's say I wanted to change this to a space separated file just because I'm feeling evil today for some reason, right? I could do print 1, 2, and then, that doesn't do a space. Let's see. There we go. So we could do a double quoted space. That worked reasonably well. Anyways, that's not something I actually want to do. The thing I really want to do is print 1, because column 1 is that's the set of stock symbols that I can now use to format our queries to the AlphaVantage API. All right, so our last command here, where we ended with awk, prints our stock symbols. And so we're going to pipe the output of this again into a command called xargs that is going to save us from having to write a for loop for this function, for the function of iterating through this list of whatever, it could be anything, and doing something with that. So xargs takes a row separated list, right? A bunch of values on different rows, and is going to iterate through those one at a time to do something else. So let's play with this a little bit. We're going to do xargs, and for now, -in, we do need to set in1 says sample each one, and then -I, capital I, is what do we want our symbol to be for the iterator? How do we want to refer to this in what we're going to be writing in our command? So I always like using the open close curly braces. That's a pretty standard way of referring to these iterator pieces, but technically you can choose a variety of things. And now after this, I can write any Unix command that I want to and refer to each of those values, the command with the curly braces. So let's do an example. I could do, I'm just going to do echo. So echo is a command that just prints that value to the screen. So I'm going to do echo and curly braces. I'm going to run that and see. Hopefully I did it right. There we go. It looks just like the output of awk. Let's check ourselves here. Let's make sure that we're doing something here. I'm going to add a bit of text here so that we can see what we're looking at. So it should print now test symbol and then the symbol that it picks. All right, so we're going to pass in our constructed API call here. Right now, we're just using echo so we can see what these API calls are going to look like. And for demo purposes, I'm hiding the the key value. So it's just going to print the X's in the demo file. All right, so we've got xargs in one each row. I is the brackets, and then here's our API call. So query function equals time series daily adjusted. That's going to work the same as time series daily. Output size is full. API key is referred to with the $AV key, which again, if you set up your demo file or your API key file like my demo file, then that's going to read that value. And the data type equals CSV, symbol equals, and then end quote, and we refer to the iterator, which is to say our symbol value for this row, and then it should tack that onto the end of the query. So let's see how this works. So we run that, and there, bam, it prints out a bunch of URLs. And if this was a real API key, we could copy and paste this and test those out in a browser just to make sure that they are working. We're not going to do that. We don't need to do that. So what we're going to need to do now is instead, we're going to need to reformat this as a call to wget so that we can send wget calls for each of these stocks to download those CSV files. Okay, so what do we need to change about this? Is what command are we going to run? So we're going to run wget instead of echo. So this time it's actually going to create those queries and wget, and then after that we need to define a parameter called output document. So we want to send these to the folder AV data that we just created slash and then our iterator and then dot CSV. Actually, let's just leave off the CSV. We're gonna name them solely on the basis of the iterator name. Yeah, let's do that. All right, so now it shouldn't print anything, but it should send one at a time the queries to the AV API. I've put in the real API key now, so it should send those and then return some CSV files. So I'm going to run that, and then we'll see if we can take a look at the output we get back. Okay, so that ran and printed some output similar to what we saw from wget before to our screen. And so if everything has gone correctly now, we can check in that AV data folder, and we should have now some data files. Let's check that, ls AV data. And it should print, there we go. There's our first 9 stock files. And we could do, let's see, head, AV data, A. All right, there we go. So we've got, we have some data here. We've got all the fields that are returned from the AV data website. Let's just try one more just to see how big this actually is. 5,347 lines for this record. So there we go. So we've got some data. We can and should now go back one more level, and I'm going to leave this running and end the video. We're going to need to change this. Go back to the very beginning, and we're going to need to run this as cat, the list of New York Stock Exchange listed stocks, so that we go through the whole list of 3,000 stocks instead of just the first 9. That's going to take a little longer to run. So I'm going to sign off here, and we'll take a look at the output of the data and what we could do with it in a later video.